We are talking to Ashlee Stephenson, Republican strategist, president of AxAdvocacy. And hey, just a side note, because you were with me at the Swedish Embassy on Friday, along with Governor Martin O'Malley, Maria Cardona, CNN Democratic contributor, and of course, Finn Gomez of CBS. Thank you for joining us. It was a great conversation. I wish it was recorded. We have to replicate that some point in the future because it was such a great mix of politics and policy.
Well, you did a great job, Steve. The questions were excellent. And what a first-class panel. Everybody offered something unique and different. So it was a privilege for me to get to join you.
So let me ask you some of the things I asked you on Friday. First and foremost, as you look at the midterm elections, and by all accounts, if you look at the poll numbers for President Trump, he is in the mid to high 30s. It looks like right now, a lot can happen, but we're 6 months out, that your party will lose control of the House of Representatives. What is your assessment, and what could change that trajectory?
Well, there are always ebbs and flows. We know this in the polling community, Steve, all the time. And I think that perhaps about 60 days into the Iran war, gas is over basically $4 everywhere across the country for unleaded. I anticipate that this could be the low water mark, and I would expect a turnaround. The president has been clear that they want to get out of this. I don't know what the plan looks like yet. I don't think many people do, but I don't anticipate that this is going to be a years-long, boots on the ground Iraq situation based on the best of what I can divulge from the reporting. And look, the turnaround is simple. Get Americans thinking that Republicans are going to be the better choice when it comes to their pocketbook than Democrats. It's the economy, stupid, and easier said than done. But if Republicans go into the 4th of July and then Labor Day weekend and gas is still high, floating around the current level we're at, I think that spells, not a good political pathway for many incumbents to be on or challengers.
And Ashlee, as you know, there are symbols that the Democrats are going to bring up in this midterm election. The fact that Donald Trump's name is on the Kennedy Center and the Institute for Peace, that his picture will now appear on passports, and of course, the east wing of the White House being torn down. How do you respond to these issues? It is Donald Trump being Donald Trump. We now know he's been on the national stage for his entire adult life, but the political stage for the last decade. But it is going to be an issue that the Democrats will try to hit home, especially in some of these hotly contested House and Senate races.
Steve, I just don't think that there's a single American in the United States who is an independent or a swing voter who's going to make their decision based on the ballroom. Now, you can argue the other side of this and use the old saying, death by 1,000 cuts. And you just have more of the same with President Trump, where you layer on top of the ballroom or the potential arc and the Kennedy Center and a whole host of things that will certainly aggravate Democrats and get them to turn out to vote. I view all of these opportunities as a turnout mechanism for Democrats that they're certainly taking advantage of. But I don't necessarily think it's good messaging for the swing electorate. These are the hardworking men and women who often make their decision very close to Election Day. And they're simply just trying to put food on the table for their families, fill up their gas tank, get a job, those sorts of things. So I don't think that these sort of Washington-esque conversations about a ballroom are ultimately going to motivate some of those independents or swing voters who are going to decide the outcome. But they certainly could turn Democrats out. I don't think it does anything to help Republicans. I simply just think it doesn't matter. But look, I tend to think a lot of this stuff is just a little bit more chatter than the real meat and potatoes of what will determine the outcome of the election.
Now people are beginning to say the Senate could be in play as you look at races in Ohio, Texas, North Carolina, and conversely, Michigan could be a potential pickup for the Republicans. We don't know what's going to happen in Maine. As you look at the Senate races holistically in some of these toss-up races, which ones are you focusing on the most?
Well, I think early in this cycle, Steve, the question was, can Democrats win back the Senate? It's transitioned to, will Democrats win back the Senate? And it depends who you talk to. Leader Schumer has a much bigger, broader map that I think is realistic at this point in time. But if you don't play to win every single election, and it doesn't matter how good or bad the year is for you, you find yourself in hot water. Even in great years for Republicans or Democrats, I can always sort of think of the race that catches up to somebody at the end that we don't expect to see coming online. I think if you're sitting from the Republican position, it's a really good thing that you see investment that has gone in early to make reservations on behalf of incumbents like Dan Sullivan in Alaska, John Husted in Ohio. These are the potential firewall states that I'm paying the most attention to, that I do believe will dictate the outcome of ultimately who's in charge. I don't think that the map gets all that big, honestly, outside of the 4 to 5 toss-ups and leans. But you never know. If this election goes really sideways for Republicans, maybe there is a chance where you'll see words like Texas being said more and more. But today I'm very pessimistic to actually think that, well, optimistic for Republicans, pessimistic for Democrats to think that Texas is truly in play, despite some of the sort of silly public polling we're seeing coming out.
So I'm going to ask this from two different vantage points. First of all, Republicans keep the House and Senate because...
Oh, they outrun the current trajectory, Steve. Republicans win the House and Senate because they clearly articulate that their conservative policies are going to be better for the pocketbooks of hardworking men and women. And they remind voters, and this is very important, they remind voters why the economy under President Biden and Democrats being in charge hit 40-year levels of inflation. That is the absolute due. Absolutely no other way to do it to maintain the House and Senate.
And then conversely, the Democrats winning the House and the Senate, potentially a wave election, that happens because...
Republicans simply cannot articulate what they need to do to win. And Democrats just simply also hang on to, I think, the coattails of a political environment that's going in their direction. Gasoline prices stay high. They put their head down and don't say anything that reminds voters why they voted them out of office in 2022 and 2024, and do not bring up the things that those independents and swing voters think are too far off of the reservation. And that would be things like boys and girls sports and some of the more left-leaning progressive goodie bag, Steve, that has just really turned off the middle of the electorate over recent years.
Again, it's only one poll, one snapshot, but from ABC News and the Washington Post, among those independents, Ashlee, the president has a 25% approval rating. So those are the swing voters that both parties count on.
So what you need to do if you're a candidate, you've got to articulate why you are the good option. You cannot run as a mini President Trump in a swing seat. And this isn't any sort of political science genius here. No one would be offended by this. I think in the White House or the administration, everybody understands that if you're running in a swing seat, you have to articulate why you, and getting voters to know you, your first and last name, is the better choice. And it's not necessarily running away from your party, but it's finding your own pathway. And really good, talented candidates who are well-resourced know this and will be looking for those breakout moments to draw contrast with their Democratic opponent and remind voters why they put them in office in the first place.
We're talking to Ashlee Stephenson. She is a Republican strategist, president of AxAdvocacy. And one of the other things we talked about on Friday afternoon at the Swedish Embassy, which, by the way, what a beautiful location right on the Potomac overlooking the Kennedy Center off of K Street in Georgetown, is looking at 2028. And Ashlee, one of the things I think that we can agree on is that there's going to be a debate among the MAGA wing of the Republican Party and the more mainstream wing of the Republican Party. I would call it the Bush, Reagan, Glenn Youngkin wing of the party. How would you assess what we're about to see in the midterms this year and, more importantly, heading into 2028?
I think that there are many similarities between both parties, Steve, through this line of thinking. It's either the far progressives, Justice Democrats, AOC, fighting with perhaps the more moderate mainstream Democrats, who those people are today, who will be the leaders of that movement. It's unclear to me, but I think the belief would have been folks like a Governor Abigail Spanberger or Mikey Sherrill. And then on the Republican side, you're just going to see this natural tension. And it's all going to be a fight for over who's going to take the MAGA mantle and run with it. And is that going to be the pathway to victory in a presidential primary? And you're going to see both sides sort of using 2026 as, I would consider it, almost like a chemistry lab or some sort of testing ground to figure out what is it that's going to be most palatable to the base of their parties to be able to carry this on into the next presidential election.
And you also have a consultant and advisor, your mom in Florida. So what is she telling you about Florida politics these days?
Oh, my goodness, Steve. Well, first of all, she loved being there on Friday and loved hearing the diverse opinions on the panel, but we know Florida is Trump country. So Florida is Trump and DeSantis country. And we also know that there's these new congressional districts that have been drawn into law. So I think that's a big win for Governor DeSantis this week in the middle of all of this mid-decade redistricting. So that's the hot take from the Sunshine State.
You think DeSantis runs in 2028?
I think if you have a pulse and you've ever wanted to be president and it's going to be an open seat, you look in the mirror and you figure out how to get ready to go.
You know, Bob Dole once told me that there's only one cure for the presidential bug, embalming fluid. Those are his lines. But anyhow.
Oh, jeez.
Ashlee Rich Stephenson, great to meet your mother, your fabulous young daughter. Thanks for joining us on Friday, and thanks for being a regular here on SiriusXM POTUS 124. We appreciate it.